Welcome back to the second lecture of Introduction to Literature, Understanding Narrative Voice. Narrative voice encompasses the distinctive style and personality conveyed through language, choices, sentence structure, vocabulary, and tone. Voice emerges from the intersection of author, narrative, and the character, creating the text's unique sound and personality. Analyzing voice requires attention to dictation, a syntax, figurative language, and the relationship between narrator and reader. The unreliable narrator, unreliable narrators, characters whose credibility is compromised by bias, limited understanding, mental instability, or deliberate deception, force readers to actively construct meaning rather than passively receive information. Recognizing unreliability develops critical reading skills and highlights fiction's exploration of subjectivity, perception, and the elusiveness of truth. Drama, performance, and textual analysis. Drama occupies a unique position among literary genres because it exists simultaneously as written text and live performance. While we can read plays silently on the page, they achieve full realization only when actors embody characters, directors interpret staging, and audiences participate in the immediate communal experience of theatrical performance. This double nature creates distinctive analytical challenges and opportunities, requiring readers to imagine performance possibilities while attending to textual details. Acts and scenes. Plays divide into acts, major divisions, and scenes, smaller units within acts, creating rhythmic structure that controls pacing, builds tension, and allows for shifts in time, location, or focus. These divisions also provide practical breaks for set change and audience rest in performance. Dialogue. Since drama lacks a narrative description, dialogue carries enormous weight in revealing character, advancing plot, establishing relationships, and conveying theme, subject, subtext, what characters mean beyond their literal words, adds complexity and psychological depth. Stage directions. Playwrights include instructions about setting, character movement, tune, and technical elements. These directions guide directors and actors while helping readers visualize the play's physical and emotional dimensions. Analyzing drama requires attention to character through dialogue and acting rather than direct psychological description. How characters speak, what they say and do not say, how they respond to others, and what they do reveals their motivations, relationships, and internal conflicts. Dramatic conflict between characters, within characters, or between characters and circumstances drives action forward and generates theoretical energy. Setting, while described minimally in stage direction, significantly impacts interpretation through design choices in production. The quality of mercy is not strained. It drops as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes. Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice serves as a foundational text for understanding drama's complexities. The play examines justice, mercy, prejudice, and the tensions between different communities in Renaissance Venus. Shylock's character is just a simple characterization, simultaneously villain demanding cruel revenge, and the victim of semantic anti-Semitism, portrays famous quality of mercy. Speech appears in a trial scene where She ultimately employs legal technicalities rather than mercy to defeat Sherlock, highlighting the gap between ideals and practice. Character analysis examine character relationships, motivations, transformations, and functions within the play's structure, conflict dynamics, identify central conflicts, and trace how they escalate, complicate, and resolve across acts. Theoretical elements consider how design, blocking, lighting, and sound contribute to meaning and performance. Creative nonfiction and graphic narratives. Creative nonfiction and graphic narratives represent literature's expanding boundaries, challenging traditional distinctions between fiction and nonfiction, between written text and visual art. These genres combine factual content with literary craft, demonstrating that true stories can employ sophisticated narrative techniques typically associated with fiction while maintaining commitment to actual events and lived experience. This generic motivation opens literature to new voices, perspectives, and moods of expression. I Rigoberta Minucci. This testimonial narrative recounts Minucci's experiences as an indigenous Guatemalan woman during civil war and political repression. The text raises questions about authenticity, representation, and whose stories get told, while powerfully documenting state violence and in indigenous resistance. Minucci's testimony exemplifies how personal narratives can serve political and historical purposes. Persepolis by Jane Satterby. Satterby's graphic memoir chronicles her childhood in Iran during the Islamic Revolution through stark black and white illustrations. The visual medium allows Satrabi to convey complex political realities, cultural tensions, and the personal coming of age simultaneously. Images capture what words alone cannot, the feeling of wearing a veil, the visual propaganda of revolutionary Iran, the contrast between public and private slaves, selves. Uh, Creative nonfiction encompasses memories, personal essays, literary journalism, travel writing, and hybrid forms that blend research with personal reflection. Unlike academic or journalistic writing, creative nonfiction employs literary techniques, scene construction, dialogue, sensory detail, metaphor, narrative arc to make factual material engaging and meaningful. The creative designation doesn't suggest invention of fact, but rather artful arrangement and presentation of true material. Visual storytelling and literature. Graphic narratives use sequential art to tell stories, combining images and text in ways that create meaning unavailable to either medium alone. The relationship between visual and verbal elements, sometimes reinforcing, sometimes contradicting, sometimes expanding each other, required readers to develop new literacy skills, panel arrangement, perspective, color choices, artistic style, and the spaces between panels, gutters, all contribute to narrative meaning. Ethical considerations. Creative nonfiction raises ethical questions about representation, privacy, memory's reliability, and the writer's responsibility to subjects and readers. How much artistic license is acceptable when dealing with real people and events? How do writers balance truth telling with concerns about harm? These questions do not have simple answers but must be thoughtfully considered by both writers and readers of creative nonfiction. Chapter 3, Critical Reading and Interpretation Skills. Critical reading transforms passive consumption of texts into active engagement with meaning making processes. Unlike casual reading for pleasure or information, critical reading involves systematic analysis of how texts construct meaning, what assumptions they rely upon, what perspectives they privilege, and what effects they produce. Developing analytical skills requires learning multiple interpretative approaches and understanding that texts support various valid readings while also having limits. Not everything is equally plausible or textually supported. Formalist close attention to text's internal elements, language, structure, form, imagery, independent of external context. A gender investigating representations of gender, sexuality, and patriarchal structures in literature, culture, exploring how texts engage with cultural practices, beliefs, and power structure. Biographical, examining how authors' life experiences inform the work's content, themes, and perspectives. Psychological, analyzing characters' motivations, unconscious desires, and psychological development using psychoanalytic concepts. Historical, understanding texts within their historical context and examining how they reflect or respond to their era. Active and critical reading requires specific practice, annotating texts while reading, identifying patterns and repeated elements, questioning authorial choices, considering multiple interpretations, connecting texts to broader contexts, and distinguishing between denotation, literal meaning, and the connotation, associative meanings. Symbolism when objects, characters, or actions represent abstract concepts requires careful attention to context, repetition, and cultural associations. Figurative language, including metaphors, similes, personification, and hyperbole, creates layers of meaning beyond literal expression. MN West's ANGL 1105 framework emphasizes that interpretive approaches aren't mutually exclusive. Sophisticated analysis often combines multiple perspectives to generate rich, nuanced readings. A feminist reading might incorporate historical context. A psychoanalytic interpretation might consider cultural factors. The goal is not to find the correct interpretation, but to develop well supported arguments that eliminate previously unnoticed dimensions of texts. Literary theory and critical perspectives. The feminist theory examines gender representation, patriarchal power structures, women's literary production, and how literature constructs or challenges gender norms, questions whose stories get told and whose perspectives are marginalized. Marxist theory analyzes literature through economic and class relations, examining how texts represent capitalism, labor, class conflict, and the material conditions, explores ideology and how literature supports or critiques dominant economic systems. Psychoanalytical theory applies Freudian and post-Freudian concepts to understand characters' unconscious motivations, authors' psychological investments, and readers' responses. Examine desire, repression, dreams, and symbolic meaning. Post-colonial theory investigates literature's relationship to colonialism, imperialism, and their ongoing legacies. Examines the representation of colonized people, resistance to colonial power, and hybrid identity emerging from colonial contact. Queer theory challenges normative constructions of sexuality and gender, examining how texts represent non-normative identities and desires, questions binary categories, and explores the fluidity, performance, and resistance to heteronormativity. Literary theory provides the conceptual frameworks and the vocabularies for asking certain kinds of questions about texts rather than prescribing answers. Theories offer lenses that bring particular aspects of texts into focus while potentially obscuring others. Understanding multiple theoretical approaches allows readers to recognize their own interpretive assumptions and consider alternative perspectives. Uncovering hidden meanings. Theory helps reveal what texts take for granted or leave unspoken for ideological assumptions, power dynamics, cultural biases, and unconscious patterns by making the invisible visible. Theoretical reading denaturalizes what seems obvious or inevitable, opening space for critic and alternative possibilities. This critical distance allows readers to appreciate texts' artistry while questioning their political and ethical implications. Societal critics match literary theory explicitly engages with social justice concerns, examining how literature perpetuates or challenges inequality based on gender, race, class, sexuality, ability, and other categories. Theoretical reading recognizes that literature isn't politically neutral. It allows operates within and responds to power structures. Critical analysis can expose harmful representations while also recovering marginalized voices and resistant readings. Practical application. When analyzing a text through theoretical lenses, start by identifying key passages that relate to your chosen approach. For feminist analysis, examine gender roles and the female characters. For Marxist reading, note class relations and economic details. For post-colonial critic, consider representations of cultural differences and power support interpretations with specific textual evidence while acknowledging complexity and contradictions. Chapter 4, Literature in Context. No text exists in isolation. Literature emerges from and responds to specific historical moments, cultural contexts, and social conditions. Understanding these contexts enriches interpretation by revealing what contemporary readers might have recognized immediately but becomes opaque across temporal and cultural distance. Context includes the historical period when the text was written and when it set the author's biographical circumstances and intentions to the extent we can know them, the cultural and intellectual movements influencing the work and the text's reception history, how different audiences have understood it across time. Historical context, major events, social conditions, and political structures shaping the world the author inhabited and wrote about. Cultural context, beliefs, values, practices, and artistic movements influencing how meaning was constructed and understood. Authorial context, writer's background, experiences, stated intentions, and position within literary tradition. Reception context, how contemporary and subsequent readers interpreted the text and how meanings shift across time and place. Examining authorial background requires balancing respect for the writer's experience and perspectives with recognition that texts often exceed authorial intentions. Authors do not fully control their text's meanings. Unconscious influences, ideological assumptions, and the nature of language itself introduces complexities beyond deliberate design. Moreover, readers from different positions bring their own contexts to interpretation, generating meanings the author couldn't have anticipated. Reader reception studies examine how different communities interpret texts based on their particular contexts. A novel might resonate very differently with contemporary readers than with audiences decades later. What seemed radical becomes conventional. What was universally praised becomes controversial. These shifts reveal how literary meaning is socially constructed rather than inherent in texts themselves. Identity and power dynamics. Literature both reflects and shapes how individuals and groups understand identity. Categories like race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, class, nationality, and region. Texts can reinforce dominant ideologies or challenge them, sometimes doing both simultaneously. Analyzing identity representation requires attention to whose perspectives are centered, whose are marginalized, and what assumptions about identity the text takes for granted. Power dynamics: who has authority to speak, who is silenced, who benefits from existing structures, operate both within texts and in literary institutions, determining whose work gets published, taught, and canonized. Diversity and inclusion in literature. Representation matters. The stories told, whose perspectives are centered, which experiences are validated as universal, and which are marked as different, profoundly impact both individual readers and cultural understanding. For much of literary history, Western education emphasized a narrow canon dominated by white male European and American authors. While these texts offer genuine value, treating them as the sole representative of literary achievement excludes vast traditions and voices, while implicitly suggesting that certain experiences and perspectives are more important or artistically worthy than others. Race and ethnicity. Literature by writers of color challenges stereotypes, recovers marginalized histories, and explores the complexities of racial identity in various contexts. These texts make visible experiences and perspectives often excluded from dominant narratives. Gender and sexuality. Women writers, LGBT plus authors, and texts exploring non-binary identities expand understanding of genders, social construction, and sexuality's complexity. These works challenge patriarchal and heteronormative assumptions embedded in much literary tradition. Class, working class voices and perspectives on economic inequality exposes how class shapes opportunity, identity, and representation. Literature exploring class dynamics challenges myths about meritocracy and individual achievement in divorced from structural conditions. Non-Western voices. Ama Ata Idol's novel Sister Killjoy. We will continue this era next and last session of introduction to literature. So thank you so much for watching me teaching you this wonderful subject, and until next time, ta for now.